Hey guys, how you doing? I wanted to take a few moments, well, probably more than a few moments, to discuss the 1988 version of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I've just watched this. I saw it a long time ago when I was probably about 11 years old. I wanted to talk about it because I'm in a book club, and in my book club, we just read the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe novel. And I've seen the 2005 film, which I think is awesome. But I wanted to go back and watch some of the earlier ones. I started to watch the cartoon from 1979, and I didn't really think I was going to enjoy that after starting it, so I decided to watch this instead. I thought it'd be fun as a rewatch. There's a lot to get through with this, but I'll just say my overall review is I mostly like this. I think it's mostly enjoyable to watch, but some of that time is because it's so bad it's good, and some of that time is not good. It's just bad. And it takes away from the enjoyment a little bit. But, okay, what can I say about this? Well, first, I don't know any of the backstory about this. So, if I'm talking about this and there's something in there that I mention and there's a reason that happened behind the scenes that explains why they did it a certain way, I'm not aware of that, and I won't be reviewing it from that context. I only have seen it. I've never known anything about it. The only thing I really know about this is that it's from the BBC. And I've seen other things from the BBC that were made around this time, so I have that knowledge of it. On a positive note, this is a very good adaptation, I think, as far as faithfulness goes, because they just really hammer in, because I've read this book a few times recently. I listened to it on Audible. In my book club, I have to make notes every week for us to go over whatever chapters we've read, so I've read this book multiple times, and they go out of their way to cover a lot of the lines, a lot of the dialogue, and a lot of the concepts in that book. So, props to them for that. Because, personally, I would like to see more films and TV series that are adaptations of books follow those books more closely. Try to get as many words from the book into the movie as possible. Now, sometimes you make changes and you have a very good adaptation anyway. I think the 2005 film is a good example of that. In fact, I think that 2005 film is one of the best book adaptations I've ever seen, as far as just doing a book justice, changing things that need to be changed, and not putting a bunch of quote-unquote modern humor into it that just makes it cringy to watch. It's funny, and it's not overly done. This does, like I said, it does try to follow it more to the letter, but it results in some problems sometimes. So the main problem I have with this is making decisions that poorly affect the overall product for no reason. So there are some things in here from a technical standpoint that are bad that really couldn't be helped. And then there are some things that I think they could have just changed something and it would have been fine. And then there are some things just purely from a story standpoint which could have been altered a little bit to try to keep the presentation intact. So let me give you some examples. Some things that are bad that couldn't really be helped. There's the animation cut in with live action. You know, you've got just straight up 2D animation cut into the final product. That's something that I can tolerate, and I actually kind of give it a pass because it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting art style. I don't really think it's bad. It's definitely not realistic looking, but they're not going for realism here. They're going for, okay, this is mystical, this is or magical, and I'm going to try to put something in there that's going to make it faithful without necessarily adhering to realism. I understand that. There's also the costumes in this adaptation, because I think probably with the puppetry they couldn't have used as many animatronic animals as they needed to use. So great example of this, Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. You know, they're just people in suits, and it's very weird when you watch it the first time, like just watching someone walk around in a suit who's supposed to be like a 2-foot beaver. And instead it's just a man in a beaver suit, like walking through the forest, like, I'm a beaver, you know? It's just kind of weird. But, you know, you get used to it. And if you'd never read the novel, it wouldn't be weird to you, because the first person that Lucy meets is a fawn man. So if she's going to meet a fawn man, why not a beaver man? It makes sense, so that couldn't really be helped. It's a detail from the book that would bother you, but if you're just watching it, it's not going to bother you. Now we get to some things that are bad, in my opinion, for no reason. I'm sure that there were reasons why these things were done the way that they were, but I just from a purely writer production standpoint, I have no idea why they did it this way. So, one of those things. Making Aslan's mouth move. Why? Why would they do this? The puppet they use for Aslan has very slow jaw movements, and it moves very slow. Now that'll help me get to another point I'm going to make in a second, but the jaw moves so slow on that I just can't help but wonder, why didn't they just have his mouth just not move and then just have the voice there? That would have been far, far, far less distracting. It's one of those decisions. It's just like, why? Why would you do this? Why did you do that? And yes, we've all seen something like that from a children's film from back in the day, where something is supposed to be talking and the mouth doesn't move, and it's weird at first. It's like, well, where's the voice coming from? But, Aslan, he is a magical lion. Maybe he's talking to them in their heads, There's no reason why he has to have a mouth that moves. He's a talking lion. There's no real talking lions. We don't know the rules, right? Instead, they just did this. Bad for no reason. Another thing that's bad for no reason. The dialogue and the editing in this is so slow. It is so uncomfortably slow. You can watch some of these lines being delivered, and you just see these people take long pauses. You know what it reminds me of? When someone's reading off of a prompter, but it's not keeping up with them. Were these actors reading off of a prompter? Was there a prompter off camera that had all the words that they were supposed to say because they didn't want to take time to have to memorize their lines because they had a short amount of time? I don't know. But the dialogue is so slow, and the editing is slow too. I think they could seriously have shaved a quarter of the time off, and this is pretty long. This is like 2.5 hours altogether. Granted, it is split up into episodes, maybe like 5 or 6 episodes maybe. But they probably could have shaved a quarter of that time off if they just would have had angles, had shots, camera shots that cut quicker, if they just would have sped a couple things up. The animatronic lion, and again, why didn't they just speed that footage up? He's not with the mouth. I mean, I would have had them not move the mouth at all, but he's sitting there and his head is moving back and forth so slow. And he goes to roar and he puts his head down, and then there's this awkward pause and he puts it back up. It's like, obviously you speed that footage up. You have a still camera on that lion, and because they did this dramatic camera pan when he did that, and it's like, I understand wanting to have that be a beautiful shot, but you got to work with what you have, man. You got to change things when they don't work on screen. Maybe originally they thought this lion was going to move faster, but after they realized that the animatronic isn't moving faster, then you got to change. You keep a still camera on the lion, you have him there, you have him do the motion, and then you speed it up in post, and then you can dub the lines. But the actor who voices the lion is kind of trying to say the lion slowly to kind of match the head movements of the lion. It's just kind of a mess. It's just so weird and so awkward. I don't understand. And the other thing is, and I don't know if this is for no reason, and by the way, I don't mean to attack these people personally, okay? I'm sure they're decent, perfectly nice people, and a lot of it's direction, okay? I'm not trying to attack the director either. Just sometimes things don't come together, okay, on certain projects. That being said, the overacting in this is incredible sometimes. The White Witch, some of her lines are just so weirdly delivered. Is she a stage actress? A lot of people who perform on stage have that kind of over-the-top facial expression and vocal delivery kind of performance where it has to project to a whole room and you have to be able to notice things from far away in a room. So you're going to deliver lines with a lot of dramatic emphasis. How dare you? Those kinds of things. But for a while in the film, everybody else is delivering their lines very naturally, and she comes in and is sort of doing this grandiose auditorium performance, and it's very strange. And when you combine that with the slow pacing of her lines, there are times where she's just pausing for a very long time when she's saying things, and it's really weird. And part of what makes this strange is that you are unprepared for any of these shenanigans when you start watching this. In the beginning of the film, well, the series, in the beginning of the series, you've got the four kids, four Pevensies, you got the professor, you got the Macready, Mrs. Macready, and that's about it. You got a couple of Mrs. Macready's friends. It takes place in the natural world, in the real world. Only a handful of people on the cast, all delivering their lines pretty naturally. By the way, I have to say, I'm going to get to the good stuff in a moment, but I have to say right here, the professor, very good actor, probably the best actor in the whole thing. But anyway, you've got all that going on. It all seems pretty straightforward. And then you go to Narnia and things get real goofy. And you know that things are going to get goofy if you've read the book. But in the book, when things get goofy, they get goofy because they're weird. They get goofy because the concepts are weird. Part of the charm of Narnia is that the animals are talking as if they're humans. They don't really understand that it's weird to have a talking beaver. So, they don't really understand that it's weird to have a lion that's just the king, that's a good guy, Basically like Mufasa, of Narnia. They don't understand that stuff's weird. So that's what the charm is. It's kind of an ironic charm that you've got going in Narnia, right? In the movie, when things get goofy, it's because everything I just mentioned, all those problems I talked about, the overacting, the 2D animation interspersed with that, the weird animatronics, the people in fursuits, like all of that stuff just starts. And you're just, and if you haven't read the book, you're probably just sitting there like, what is this? It's kind of funny because in the beginning, it just looks like a normal character drama with kids. It looks like, a story with four kids who are living in a home with a professor. Maybe it's kind of a coming-of-age story. And then you go in here and things just take a turn south. And you're like, wow, that was weird. So I just really want to see the expression of the parents who turned this on for their kids in the 80s and hadn't read the book or anything, or the kids hadn't read the book, and they were just watching it. And then they went into the wardrobe, and there was a wood inside there. Like, that's kind of weird. And there's a giant, goat guy. Okay. And then there's, this white witch, and who has these 2D animated, goonies that help her. Goons, I should say. Hired goons. So, I don't know. It just gets really weird from there. And the pacing is the main thing about this. Man, that pacing is pond water slow sometimes. But let me talk about the good now. I want to talk about a few of the good things. So, first good thing, the acting. I know I just mentioned the overacting, but most of the people who are overacting in this are in Narnia. By the way, I'm sorry, I have to backtrack for a minute. I missed something really obvious here. Morgan. Oh, Morgan. This is one of those things that's bad for no reason. They have him go, ah! They have him roar as a wolf. Why not? Oh, sorry, I can't get to the positive. I forgot a couple things. I was completely surprised by Morgan's roar in the letter. It just, and that was where the cliffhanger was. This is the Doctor Who 1988 cliffhanger right there where the credits roll. And they just, for whatever reason, had him roar, and it was supposed to be a scary thing. They didn't put any effects on his voice. They didn't, lower it. They didn't slow it down. I mean, that's a very cheap effect to do. You have someone roar, with a normal, you just have him go, rah, and then you slow it down so it's rah, and then you put echo on it so it's rah, That's a very easy effect to do. I mean, you're telling me the BBC couldn't have afforded to do that? I mean, the BBC did stuff like that with Doctor Who. So I don't know why. It's any sound engineer in the 80s of all time periods, even in the 70s they did stuff like that in Doctor Who. But in the 80s, 1988, this is 5 years before Jurassic Park, You're telling me the BBC couldn't have afforded to slow that down and put some echo on it? Or something? Add some distortion to it? Something to make that scarier? I don't know. And then, lastly, and I can't believe I forgot to mention this until now, Aslan's roar. What's the deal with that? He's like, put your fingers in your ears, children, I'm going to roar. And he's like, you know, it's such a subdued roar. They couldn't have gotten access to a lion's roar that was more intimidating, or they couldn't have generated that somehow, even with a human, like I said, with a wolf thing. You know, so some of these decisions were just, why? They're just inexplicable. Like, why would you do that? It's like, well, someone at the BBC probably thought we have to have an actual lion's roar. You know, this is what I'm talking about with good filmmaking. And I'm not a filmmaker, okay? So I understand I'm criticizing here, but I'm going off of the knowledge I have here about films because I research a lot of things about films and how they're made and the decisions people make behind the scenes. I watched a lot of audio commentaries when I was a kid. Not an expert, not saying that. I'm just saying I'm repeating things that I've heard from people who actually do make films, like of the Spielberg quality and stuff like that. When you have something like that happens, when you make the decision, this has to be a lion's roar, and then you listen to the lion's roar, kind of like the thing with the animatronic thing. When you listen to the lion's roar, and it sounds lame, replace it with something else. You know? It's better to have an intimidating roar made by a human than to have a not intimidating roar made by a lion. You know? Like I said, so and I know I talked about the 2D animation, but I actually wanted to come back to that because I thought of something else on that. The 2D animation there, at that point, I think it probably would have been better to just ask for a change to the script. Now, I know I'm kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth on this because I said I didn't mind it, but if I were in that studio and I realized that we couldn't afford to have as many animals as we need for those shots, I would have asked them to just, change the script, have the battles be smaller in scale, you know? It's like, well, why would the witch have a battle that's small in scale? I don't know. But that's where writers come in. That's where script changes come in. You work with what you have. You say, how can we make the best story for the resources we have, you know? And I know I keep mentioning Doctor Who, but Doctor Who was written around a lot of those things too. They would go and see which costumes they had in the BBC store units and say, okay, we have a bunch of Roman outfits. Let's make a story about the Romans. Okay, cool. You know, and here they say, well, we can't really afford full-scale animals here. Like we can't afford a bunch of animals coming in and charging, and we just don't have the budget for that. All right, well then let's make costumes. Let's make more costumes. Let's make it so the witch has more people in her army, for example. Let's say the witch has a bunch of like elves or something weird in her army like that, and we'll just have a bunch of elf people. That way, sorry about that. That way we only have to deal with ear props for people's, put two on each person and make their ears pointy. Something like that to make it less goofy, Okay, so that's, and I mentioned I've seen other BBC productions from back in that time, and honestly, the slow pace is kind of common for the BBC. I don't know why that is. And keep in mind, not to just keep comparing it to American productions, which I'm doing, because I said, Jurassic Park, but Star Wars, Star Wars 1977. The cutting in that movie was very snappy, it was not snappy by today's standards, but definitely compared to the things at the time, and definitely compared to this comes out 11 years later. It just has extremely slow pacing. If you want to compare that to something that's more similar, like something fantasy, kind of children's fantasy, The Never-Ending Story. That came out before this. I'm pretty sure that was it 1984? I think, maybe? 85? I'm not sure. But The Never-Ending Story. That movie, very good editing, again, much higher budget, right? But I don't think you need a higher budget to be able to cut things, do you? You need to, and why couldn't the director have said, okay, deliver that line a little faster? Like we were they're going slow here, So, anyway, that's the negatives. Let's get to the positives. Okay, coming back to the positives. Good acting. The 4 kids in this, really good. I don't know what specifically they went through to cast them, and I don't know how they chose, how to direct them and stuff. Because child actors are always difficult because, well, I'm not a director, but I've just heard child actors are just notoriously harder to direct. It's harder to get them to understand what you're saying because they don't have as much experience. They don't have adult minds to be able to communicate it the same way that other adults do. So it's harder to tell them what to do. But for whatever reason, I think they did this really well. Yes, there are a couple times, and again, not attacking them or anything. There were just a couple times in this when the kids are delivering the lines in a very whiny way where you're like, oh my gosh. Like it gets kind of under your skin a couple times. But, other than that, they're perfectly serviceable in these roles, especially for a BBC TV production from 1988. And I know I keep using double standards here because a second ago I compared this to Star Wars, but either way, I think, that they did a perfectly fine job. The professor, very good performance. The only thing about the professor's performance is, like, they kept doing that thing where he would say something and look down at the paper and, like, start writing again, which, it's fine, but it's just kind of weird. It seems a little unnatural for him to be doing that. But he is a very eccentric professor, so, that's perfectly fine. McCready, perfectly good, I think probably the best of the kid actors were probably Peter and Lucy. Susan really didn't have a lot to do in this. I mean, she was there the whole time, but she didn't have a necessarily strong character presence in the script. This is mostly Lucy's story, and Peter is the leader, so that's pretty natural that it's going to be the two of them who stand out the most. But yeah, just pretty strong performances from them, I think, in this. It's surprisingly so. It's kind of weird. It makes you wonder why the kids perform so much better than the lady who played the White Witch. The White Witch's servant guy who's always on the sled and stuff. I think that was kind of... I think they injected a little humor into that because he's just always kind of there like, heh, He's just kind of laughing all the time, kind of just unnecessarily evil performance there, and it's funny. He doesn't really do a whole lot, but yeah. And again, sorry to say this, but the guy that got to play Aslan, he just, I don't know. He definitely had that kind of honor. He had that kind of authoritative voice, but I think that should have been a little bit more quick and a little bit more strong, a little bit more aggressive in his tone. There's a couple moments where Aslan kind of shines, when he's going to be, executed by the Queen of Narnia, the Queen of Narnia, and his performance is very sullen. He's like, put your hand in my mane. And that's a very good part. I think it comes together. And there's a little moment at the end where he says, daughter of Eve, must more die for Edmund? And the camera zooms in on his face, and you hear a little lion growl. He says, daughter of Eve. It's kind of just a little aggressive thing right there. Those little moments, some of those, it's like, oh, I see what they were going for, but man, they should have done a lot more with that. Mr. Tumnus, he was good. Good performance. I don't really have any complaints about that. Giant Rumblebuffin. I love Giant Rumblebuffin in this. It's perspective. The camera is low. Giant Rumblebuffin's just above the sky. It's pretty funny. And he just goes over there and kicks the gate. Perfectly fine. And as far as how it was executed, and I think his performance was good. It's just charming. You need that charm when you're doing Narnia stuff. I don't know if they went back and did adaptations of The Magician's Nephew. I think The Magician's Nephew was written in the second half of the 1950s. I was under the impression that book was written way later than it was. I thought The Magician's Nephew came out in like the 80s or something. But I was very much mistaken about that because I don't even know if C.S. Lewis was living at that time. I just thought he wrote that way later. But no, it was written less than a decade after The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which of course was written first. But overall, it's a nice thing to watch. It's worth a watch. I've said this for TV series that were adaptations of books before. It's worth a rental if you want to watch something that's entertaining. But I just wish that given the product we got, it was so bad it's good more often. Most of the time, the badness in it is laughable, but not in a way that's enjoyable. You're just like, oh my gosh, that was not good. But again, the good outweighs the bad. The presentation is nice in this. I'll talk about more things that are good. The presentation, great. The colors in this, I like the more gritty look of Narnia in this. Not gritty as in like gothic or anything, but it looks to be lived in. A never-ending story, the house of that old couple, that's kind of what they were not going for, because they weren't copying it, but that's the kind of look they were going for. I'll say that. I like that Narnia is very green. It's very classic British television, I'll say that. It just has that British television look to it. The music in this, pretty good. It's not something you're going to be humming probably, but the music, it kind of gives you the atmosphere in this. The scene where Aslan dies, it's surprisingly sad. You've got the witches overacting in that scene, but I think the reaction of the kids, again, the kid actors in this, the two little girls crying through that, and like turning the way that the witch goes to stab the lion. I'll say this: when she raises the knife, again, she brings that knife down abnormally slow. It looks like she's about to scrape Aslan. It doesn't look like she's about to kill him. I was just imagining the witch. When you read this, that she it calls it a blow, right? This is like she's gonna cut a Z in him for Zorro, So that was goofy, but then you cut to the girls, and they kind of turn their heads away really quickly and cry, and it's like, wow, that was effective. Because when you're watching films or TV shows, and you see children have a very upset reaction, that's very visceral, and so that you're cutting between this very goofy thing, which is a lady. I just realized how weird this was. You've got a lady with a stunningly pale face, overacting, and she's about to kill a badly animated puppet with a knife that isn't sharp, probably, and it looks like she's just about to cut him and pretend he's going to die. So that's goofy, and then you cut to these two kids, and then it becomes sad. So that is just a testament to their performance, I think, the effectiveness of that scene. I have to talk about one more bad thing, too, which is the scene where Aslan rides back to the palace, when the two kids are just writing Aslan.png. It's like bad green screen, and rather than having him run, they just showed him leaping. That was another one of those why moments. It's like, why didn't you just have a close-up of them on his back and then show the perspective? If you're going to do the green screen shot, just have the green screen shot and then have a shot behind Aslan's head and then blow some wind on it, and then just have the foreground asset of Aslan's head with the wind blowing the mane back, and then just have the shot going forward, and then cut to Lucy and Susan riding on the back of Aslan, which they kept doing that anyway. And then just maybe if you're going to have a running shot where you're going to show his head and the girls, just don't show his legs and put in a brum, 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 brum sound, put in a sound of him running. It's just showing too much for no reason, making it bad for no reason. Anyway, but if this was the only adaptation we had besides the cartoon, it wouldn't really bother me. I might say to myself, I hope someday someone comes along and makes another adaptation of this, but the story is intact, okay? The story is enough to get you through this, because the story, I think, is a good story. And even though there are all these, I know this was mostly a negative review, and I'm sorry, because I talked about it was mostly good, but the thing that carries it through is the acting and the writing of the actual plot, which is interesting. If you were watching this, yes, it would be bad, but if you were watching it for the first time, you would want to know what happened the next week. By the by, I love the brutality of just ending it when Aslan dies. That's pretty hardcore for kids who hadn't read the book. They just kill Aslan and the episode is over. It's like, nope, go home, no comfort, no happy ending, go to bed now. That was really hardcore. I bet that upset a lot of kids back in the 80s. I think they probably should have done something else there. Maybe edited that a little bit different, but it's just like, you know, I could just, like I said, I could hear the Doctor Who cliffhanger right there, you know. And now Aslan's dead. Shh, wee, you know, you can just kind of hear that there. Or perhaps the end credits with no music. But, you know, it's just, it's unnecessarily brutal in a way that I think is kind of funny. But I'd be interested to look up reviews of this and what people thought at the time, because this seems like one of those things where it might be kind of hard to actually find that, which I find that frustrating sometimes, that you're trying to look up a review of something and you just can't really find a good review of it. But anyway, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, 1988. What did you think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments if you would like to. But I am going to be discussing the 2005 film with my book club next week, and that will be fun. But I thought, hey, I'm going to be watching the other film. Why not give this one a watch? And maybe someday I'll see it at Walmart or some bookstore on DVD, and I'll buy this on DVD just to see the behind-the-scenes shenanigans that were happening. This, by the way, seems like one of those productions which was troubled, but I'll look it up. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys next time. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.